From Washington, the McLaughlin Group, the American original. For over 3 decades, the sharpest minds, best sources, hardest talk.
Hello, welcome to another edition of the McLaughlin Group. I'm Tom Rogan. Our guests this week are the familiar faces of Eleanor Clift, Clarence and Pat Buchanan. And our special guest this week is Ryan Girdusky, a longtime friend of the show. Welcome, Ryan. On that note, we shall get to our first issue, which is issue 1, Insecurity.
A mixture of peaceful protests and violent rioting continued across the nation this week. President Trump continues to insist that only he can restore order to America. And while Joe Biden has taken a more ardent stance against rioting, the Democratic nominee also insists that police reform will be at the top of his governing agenda. But in some places, insecurity is rising. According to the New York Times, in the Big Apple, shootings doubled in August from levels in August 2019, and murders rose by nearly 50% in the same period.
Pat, your thoughts on the political context of what we see in this really serious, in some cases, insecurity in certain American cities?
I think the issue is really one in which the Democrats could be defeated. It is worse, it's the greatest vulnerability of the Democratic Party. There are two components. One is the riots, the disorder, arson, anarchy that we see night after night on television. The second is what you mentioned, New York. The Democratic Party is especially vulnerable. Biden's been brought out of his basement by this. Black Lives Matter is now underwater in terms of approval, disapproval. And I think what you're going to see, Tom, in the very first debate is Donald Trump driving hard that Biden and his party are simply ill-equipped morally and politically to deal with the crisis of law and order in the nation.
And yet, Eleanor, it does seem that Joe Biden has adopted a more robust stance in condemning violent criminality. And at the same time, President Trump doesn't seem to have had the bump in the polls that perhaps he would have wanted at this point.
Right, and with all due respect, the president's efforts to ramp up violence in the city by outwardly inciting people and praising people on the right who come out and use violence to support him, that's been completely overtaken by, one, the president's remarks that came out in a magazine piece calling veterans who died for this country losers, and the more recently the Bob Woodward book, which has taped conversations with the president, beginning with one on February 7th or 9th, long before any of us knew a whole lot about this virus, where the president is telling the author that the virus is much more deadly than the flu, 5 times as deadly. That's not just old people, it's young people too, and it gets transmitted through the air. And how did he learn that? He learned that from Chinese President Xi, who he'd just gotten off the phone with. It is the most incredible display of duplicity by a leader, because the president, while he knew all of this, was advocating no mask wearing. He was actively working against public health measures. If this were a court of law, this would be an act of malice, if not worse. And so focusing on a handful of cities that are experiencing some unrest is not going to distract from the epic failure of this president on the coronavirus, and he has brought our attention fully back to that issue.
Ryan, your thoughts on what Eleanor mentions there, and also the political context of this insecurity?
I think the one thing that most people are forgetting is that in the last 120 days, 5 million Americans became first-time gun owners. That is the largest amount ever recorded in our history since we started keeping records of first-time gun purchasers. That's enormous. And you don't sit there and bring that firearm into your home for the very first time and then vote for the party that's defending the mob. And there is now too much paper trail of Kamala Harris advocating for bailing rioters out of prison in Minneapolis. Too much of a paper trail of Democrats being soft on crime to sit there and kind of distance yourself from just a couple of speeches here and there from Joe Biden. Although, he's never been, a supporter of anarchy. His party has certainly been soft on crime. Part of the reason that in my state, in New York State, you're seeing such an explosion in crime rate is because Governor Andrew Cuomo and the Democratic state legislature passed a bail reform bill which ended cash bail. I mean, it did actually even worse things than that. In New York State, a criminal has the ability to sit there and revisit the home that he committed his assault or attack on. So if someone comes into your home and attacks you, he can go back into your home under the law in New York State to sit there and find evidence of his defense. That is partially, these left-wing district attorneys are part of the reason you're seeing this rampant high rate of criminality in these states, not to mention the Minneapolis effect, which was like the Ferguson effect. After Black Lives Matter rallies happen, you do see a large proportion of crime. And I think that that's serious. As far as the Bob Woodward article goes, it didn't even hit #1. The Bob Woodward book, rather, goes, the book didn't even hit #1 on Amazon. I don't think there was anything that salacious in it. And the Atlantic article has already been dismissed by many, many people who were in the room at the time. And there were 4 people, all anonymous. So it's not, okay. I think the fact that you're seeing Trump ramp up, bringing troops home from Afghanistan and Iraq at the same time brings a lot of questions as far as, the validity of that article.
Right. Clarence, your thoughts?
Well, you're certainly giving me a nice big basket full of things to talk about.
Right.
Here.
Go,
Let me
Clarence.
start first of all, Tom, I'm going to take your question as an invitation for me to give you my latest Chicago update. This past week, Attorney General Bill Barr came to Chicago and was not greeted warmly by the mayor, but he had a news conference to which the mayor and the heads of the police department did not attend. Interestingly, and Mr. Barr made note of that. At the same time, though, the mayor had a press conference the day before in which she announced the latest crime data, which shows for the first time in a while a significant drop in violent crime over the last month. And Bill Barr the next day took credit for that because of the Operation Legrand or Lagarde, Legend, Operation Legend, which the Trump administration has administered in a little over a dozen cities in order to bring crime down. I would say, what's interesting about this is that the police chief did take, a police superintendent did take Bill Barr around on a ride along. That was cordial, and also the mayor has worked cordially with the U.S. attorney for the Northern District, who they're both prosecutors. She was a former prosecutor who worked with him before, and they've had some great cooperation, but it's not bringing in the troops or agents in paramilitary garb like in Portland, where I think it arguably made things worse. She didn't want things worse in Chicago. And they do have several hundred new federal agents in town who are helping immensely with things like gun crimes, which guns coming in over the border with Indiana, et cetera, are a big cause of the violence around there. In any case, they're making progress. They can argue over who deserves credit for it. The point is that progress is being made when politics doesn't get in the way. And so I think you're seeing that around the country. Portland is kind of an oddball in itself there, but there's not much reason for me to believe we're back in the 70s again, when indeed we really did see some serious crime, urban crime that was bringing down the image of the big cities. Nowadays, the city and the suburbs have changed immensely, demographically, attitudinally, politically. I think President Trump, in playing the crime card, Ryan, is playing an old card. We will find out on Election Day.
All right, well, about 20 seconds each, tight on time, so if we keep it to that, let's do one round robin and then we'll move on. Pat, 20 seconds.
Well, to find out whether the issue of crime and disorder and arson and riot and looting is a major issue, ask yourself, what did Joe Biden and his team do when Trump was hammering it hard? He comes out of his basement, he runs and announces that I'm for law and order, I've always been that. He denounces violence. That tells you what his polls are saying. Now, there have been distractions like these books, but I will tell you, this is going to be a major issue this fall. and it's the principal vulnerability of the Democratic Party nationally and its candidate.
All right. That was about 45 seconds, but Eleanor, you go.
News flash, Pat, Biden is out of his basement. He's traveling. He is saying quite clearly he does not support violence on either side, whereas the president only supports violence on his side. And you must have some recollection, perhaps, of the Watergate days and what did you know and when did you know it, and what this president knew about the virus, and he lied to everybody. And you were on this show numerous times talking about this is the flu, it's not so bad. How do you feel about the president lying to you?
All right, got to move on very quickly, Ryan.
I think a big thing, a lot of police unions endorsed Donald Trump. I think that it may play into the security and crime issue.
All right, very good. Clarence?
A lot of the police unions are in trouble for being in the way of real reform. We're talking about, indeed, that bail issue. Well, I don't want to go too long here, but that bail issue is one that is good and debatable and will play out. But on the whole, I think that the crime issue is not going to be that big of a factor, or we would have seen it in the polling already.
I would simply say that I think one of the issues here is police officers not patrolling in certain areas because they don't feel they'll be treated fairly. And I think based on the comments that have come out from district attorneys before an investigation into allegations of police misconduct has ever, really been able to fulfill, they have a fair gripe in that regard. But we will see. I'm sure this issue will come again. Anyway, we will move on to our next issue, which is issue 2, a question of legitimacy.
In a recent Washington Post article, Professor Rosa Brooks outlined a number of war games which examined various election night outcomes. Conducted by the quote-unquote Transition Integrity Project, an anti-Trump organization with some conservative supporters, Brooks' team examined what they claim are the 4 most likely election night outcomes, these being a narrow Biden win, a big Biden win, a Trump win, and a period of uncertainty a la 2000. Brooks asserts that, quote, with the exception of the big Biden win scenario, each of our exercise reached the brink of catastrophe with massive disinformation campaigns, violence in the streets, and a constitutional impasse, unquote. To mitigate the risk of these outcomes, Brooks says that the military and law enforcement must commit to uphold the election process and that the media should, quote, help people to understand that voter fraud is extraordinarily rare, unquote. Brooks adds that social media platforms must be ready to remove, quote, false statements spread by foreign or domestic disinformation campaigns, unquote.
Eleanor, I think obviously a lot of Democrats will read that and think, okay, great ideas. A lot of conservatives might say, who gets to define the parameters of what is true in a free society? But how serious do you think this threat of a foreign actor shaping the outcome of the election is?
No, I think it was clear from 2016 that Russia actually hacked, I think, 21 electoral systems in 21 states. They didn't actually change any votes. And disinformation, Facebook has already gotten rid of as many Russian trolls as they possibly can, but there are more out there. But those tabletop exercises that you just talked about, I've written about that, I've talked about that on this show. The people who participated were Republicans and Democrats across the board, and they acted out what they thought their side would do in the event of an outcome that they didn't agree with. And I think the one that created a lot of dissension would be a Biden big win in the popular vote and a loss in the Electoral College, which I think is the only possible way that President Trump could win this reelection, with a narrow electoral win. And what they found out in these exercises, which is no big mystery, that both sides have cast the outcome of this election in such apocryphal terms. It's the end of democracy if Trump is reinstated, or I guess Trump says, we will be all communists and socialists if he's not reelected. So when you set the election in those terms, you can't concede. And Hillary Clinton has already suggested to Joe Biden, don't concede if it doesn't look like you're winning. So the lawyers are going to have a lot to do, and because of all the write-in ballots, there's going to be a lot of counting that's going to go on after Election Day. So, we're in for it. But if the right president, the one who actually wins, is inaugurated on January 20th, the system will have worked.
Pat.
My feeling is this. If it's a clear victory in the Electoral College, as it was in 2016 in the Electoral College, and decisive, I think people will accept that. But I think if you've got another 2000 where the situation is up in the air and Florida is undecided and there's hanging chads and ballots are allegedly stolen and all the rest of it, and it's undecided 48 hours after Election Day, I think you got a problem for a real crisis of confidence in the American political system. But that's only, I think, if it's close. If there's clarity in the Electoral College, I think either side will accept it and either side will depart as the Constitution commands or take office.
So it's not going to be a Roman civil war after Caesar. Anyway, all right. Clarence, your thoughts?
Well, I think that we are better prepared this time than before. There's always new tricks coming down the pike. I think on the whole, people will be ready for that. The scenarios that Pat draws, though, are possibility. As possible, you might have a contested electoral college vote as a result of a contested general election vote. And it could go to the Supreme Court again. I think a lot of what we're talking about, though, what other people are talking about, is the possibility of Donald Trump losing, but being too stubborn to want to leave the White House. And even talk about how you got to have the military ready in case, have them prepped for this. That's the kind of thing that I don't think is going to happen, because just looking at Donald Trump's record, he talks a great game. He talks real tough and the big bully and all that. But when you really push comes to shove and get him down to the wire, he caves in. I think that's what'll happen this time.
But surely in this case, the caving in would be the right thing to do. Anyway, Ryan, your thoughts?
I think that we're in a very, very dangerous situation. I would not be shocked if there was rioting in every major American city come Election Day, because I do think that with Democrats overwhelmingly pushing to vote by mail, many states will not have the results in by Election Day, and there will be a presumption that Trump will win, even if he doesn't win ultimately when all the votes are counted. And I think that will lead to a lot of rioting and distress and rioting and maybe who knows what will go on in some cities. I also think there's a lot of concerns coming out of a lot of these states that weren't able to count ballots, mail-in ballots during the primaries. New York took 2 weeks to count mail-in ballots. Other places like Broward County, Florida have also had a long history of being problematic. And there is a question of a coup going on right now. Miss Brooks, Rosa Brooks, talked about it in 2017, how she hoped for a coup. You have prominent Democrats sitting there and telling Biden, do not concede under any circumstances. And you have now former elected officials like Stacey Abrams, who was an elected Democrat and state representative, ran for governor, lost, still has never conceded. I think that there is an absolute attempt to sit there and cast doubts in the minds of millions of voters that any election result is not legitimate, and it's coming from the left right now.
Okay,
I would like to add something. Miss Rosa Brooks is the dean of the Georgetown Law School. I would give her honorific. One of the participants in those tabletop exercises told me they were asked which candidate has more to lose. And the answer was, Joe Biden loses, he goes back to Wilmington. He's an elder statesman, a pretty disgraced elder statesman, I might add. But if Trump loses, he has the prospect of facing a lot of civil litigation. So the conclusion was that Trump has more to lose than Biden, and Trump's leverage is that he can get his people in the streets. And
that is ridiculous. Yes,
we're moving on, guys. We're moving on. Issue 3: Trump's Russia record.
But you never heard of Nord Stream 2. Nobody did until I got elected. And I said, why is Germany making a deal to give billions of dollars to Russia, and then we're protecting Germany from Russia? How does that work? And then on top of it, Germany is delinquent because they're only paying a little more than 1%, and they're supposed to be paying 2%, and even the 2% is low. But just remember, Trump, I got the countries of NATO to spend $130 billion going to $400 billion a year. Think of it, $400 billion a year more for NATO.
President Trump is often criticized for his approach towards Russian leader Vladimir Putin. And to be sure, Trump regularly speaks favorably of Putin and derisively of those who suggest that the US must adopt a tougher stance towards Moscow. But measured by actions, Trump's Russia record is more complicated. Indeed, contrasted with President Obama, Trump's policy towards Russia is harsher in many areas. Trump has deployed new nuclear weapons in face of Russian low-yield warheads. The CIA and NSA have more freedom of action in Russia operations. And Trump has increased US pressure on European powers to cancel Russia's Nord Stream 2 energy pipeline. And even on support for Ukraine, an issue over which Trump was impeached, the president has at least one undeniable claim to his tougher on Russia than Obama narrative.
What we've done for Ukraine relative to what the past did. They used to send pillars and we sent tank busters.
So, Clarence, when it comes to President Trump's record on Russia, judged by action, the president has, I think, a lot stronger record than some present, but he still persists in this affection narrative towards President Putin. How do you see, as we come to the end of at least this first term, President Trump's Russia record stacking up?
Well, I think you're right that he has a tougher on Russia record than President Obama. He has a tougher record than he gets credit for from a lot of people as far as the sanctions that we level against Russia, et cetera. But again, when push comes to shove, Mr. President, who do you believe more, our intelligence agencies or Mr. Putin? Back when he was standing right next to Mr. Putin at a news conference, he chose Putin as being more reliable than our own intelligence agencies. That's the kind of thing he does in public that makes people wonder who is his real ally.
Ryan, your thoughts on President Trump's record?
I think that he has had a decent record on Russia. I mean, he did kill Russian military men in Syria when he bombed 200 Russian military men in Syria. And I think that overall, the Russia hysteria is broken most people in the left's brain in America. I don't think that Russia is the major geopolitical threat that China is. I think that the worrying over Russia borderlines insanity for a lot of people. Our contributions to NATO are far too high. I think this is borderline hysteria, how the left has treated Russia at this point.
Eleanor.
President Trump has sowed distrust in our democracy and in our election system, which Putin loves. He has also driven a wedge into NATO, which Putin loves. And in Bob Woodward's book, Dan Coates is quoted on the record, Trump's former director of national intelligence, saying that he has deep suspicions that the Russians have something on this president. And I know Peter Strzok doesn't command a lot of credibility from Pat Buchanan, but he did work in counterterrorism for 20 years. And he's got a book out, and he basically says that Trump lied during 2016 when he said he had no business interest, no interest in Russia, when his lawyer was working on a deal for Trump Tower. Trump knew he lied, the FBI knew he lied, and Putin knew he lied.
And yet, Pat, if, as Democrats have suggested for years now, the Russians do have this compromat, this danglehold over the president, President Putin hasn't got a great deal out of it, has he, in terms of actually President Trump's actions?
No, he hasn't. I think the Beltway Russophobes have got the best deal out of it. They've been promoting this theory for a long time. Look, when the Soviet Union was a mighty power, huge nuclear adversary, I was in Minsk, I was in Yalta, I was in Moscow. American presidents went there. They invited foreign leaders, Russian leaders, Soviet leaders to the United States. Look, China has an economy 10 times the size of Russia's and a population 10 times the size, and they're a global world power, and they're moving. And you guys are all worried about a country, Russia, which is smaller than it's been since the time of Peter the Great. It's
economic
into this absurdity.
Eleanor.
Economic competition is entirely different from what Putin is trying to do. And I would point out that Dan Coates is not a Democrat. He's a former Republican senator. So these are not simply partisan concerns.
No, but it's not a partisan concern, but there is a concern. Those who are neoliberal, those who are neoconservative, those who are patriots, or those who are America firsters, or those who are anti-intervention. That's where the divide is. It doesn't matter Republican, Democrat. That's not where the divide is. Dan Coates has always been a neocon, his entire record, his entire history being in the Senate even.
Okay, well, patriotism comes in many colors, but we will move on. Predictions, Pat.
Angela Merkel will not cancel the pipeline from Russia to Germany, but she will suspend it. I think she will suspend activity on it because she wants to keep it as part of her legacy eventually.
Okay, Eleanor.
President Trump will be narrating many Democratic ads for Joe Biden because his words in the Bob Woodward tapes of how he knew early on how deadly this crisis was, how he knew it wasn't just old people, and how he consciously, willfully downplayed it, will be driven home many, many times between now and November 3rd by the president himself.
Okay, Clarence.
I think the big congressional standoff over coronavirus aid is going to run down to the wire almost to election day, but that the Republicans will cave because they have more to lose.
Okay, very good. Ryan?
I believe that in the upcoming regional elections in Italy, Salvini's Lega party is going to dominate most of the regional elections, which may cause the Italian government, the Italian left-wing government, to collapse and early elections to start at the beginning of next year.
And Ryan, because you've been excellent, as you always are, but very good with your timekeeping, I want to ask you, what do you think will happen with the Senate? You're very good on data analysis. What do you think is going to happen with the Senate in November?
I think that there's a really good chance to be a 50-50 split. I think there's a really good chance 50-50 split.
Okay, very good. I predict that Pat is correct on Angela Merkel and Nord Stream 2, but I also predict that more information will come out indicating that the assassination attempt of Alexei Navalny, which is in relation to that Merkel and Nord Stream 2, will show that it was at least directed by the Kremlin in terms of the assassination, the FSB. Bortnikov, thank you for watching.